Hello, and welcome to the fourth video lecture for English 421Y Technical Writing. In this lecture, I will discuss the different types of cover letters, the general structure of a cover letter, 3 different ways to organize your body content, and common mistakes I often see when tutoring cover letters in the writing lab. Before I start, make sure you've looked over the cover letters PowerPoint and the cover letter best practices handout, both of which I co-created for a presentation to the Cranor MBA students a few years ago. I will repeat some of the information in these, but I won't go over them word for word, so it's important that you've looked over them before listening to this lecture. If you've never written a cover letter before and don't think you will need one, it's still a valuable skill to learn how to write one. First, because promotions in upper-level positions typically require them, even if entry-level positions do not. So if the first position that you have outside of college is one that you got from a recruiter fair or career fair, it probably will not require a cover letter. However, if you're at that position for maybe 3-5 years and you decide you want to apply for a manager spot or go up rank, typically those kind of internal promotions do require a cover letter. And second, these skills translate to other types of letters that you will possibly write in your career, including letters of thanks, letters of inquiry, letters of complaint, letters of apology, letters of recommendation, letters of follow-up, and letters of resignation. As the best practices handout states, cover letters are, in essence, just business letters. They're business letters with a very specific rhetorical purpose. That rhetorical purpose is connected to the particular job that you're applying for. So every cover letter should be tailored specifically for the position that you are applying to, in order to tell a story about how you are qualified for that position. You want to be very specific, directly reference keywords or requirements from the job description, and show genuine enthusiasm for the position. Similar to tailoring for resumes. However, most importantly, you should avoid using a form letter for multiple jobs because they are vague and lack the level of customization that you can get through tailoring. So while resumes end up being fairly similar from job to job, you might sub out a section, or if you're applying to an entirely different field, you might change what positions you include. Your cover letter should be even more narrow and even more tailored for that particular position. For instance, if you're applying to your dream job, the job that you really, really want, you should always write it from scratch. It should always be written specifically for that job in mind, to make sure that you say exactly what you want to, and that you address the very particular elements of that company that will influence how they read your letter. If you aren't serious about the job, you can revise and repurpose an existing letter, but still take time to make sure that it reflects the position. So this document, Cover Letter Best Practices, it provides a list of things to keep in mind while you are writing a cover letter. As I said earlier, it's something that I developed with a colleague to offer some general best practices for any kind of cover letter. So like resumes, cover letters are highly purposeful and rhetorical documents. Because the rhetorical situation for each job or position is unique to that company or organization, it's important that the structure of your cover letter matches your purpose for writing. As such, there are generally 3 different types of cover letters that, based on kind of best practices and tips from recruiters. The first is an experience-based cover letter, where each paragraph focuses on one experience and demonstrates many skills gained in that experience. By experience, I mean a job, but also an internship, a job shadowing, a class, a project, a club or organization. The second type is skills-based, where each paragraph focuses on one skill or set of skills and describes multiple experiences where that skill was gained. So rather than having one job or whatever, you're describing one skill with multiple jobs. And it doesn't just have to be jobs again. It can be jobs, one internship, one job, one club, one internship, one organization, whatever. And then finally, qualification-based. Demonstrates alignment between multiple skills and experiences and the position for which the writer is applying. Qualifications-based are even more tailored and even more specific than experience or skills-based, because the entire purpose of a qualifications-based cover letter is you're trying to show direct alignment between your qualifications and what they're looking for. Typically, qualifications-based cover letters are most common in internal applications. You've already worked for the company for a while and you're applying for another position within the company. Or maybe you're applying for another location within the company or something along those lines. They know you to a certain extent, but you need to show that you have experience. You need to show that your experiences within the company transfer to the position that you're applying, and you need to show that you align with their values. Typically, it helps when you have kind of inside information. You already know what the company is and what they value, so you're able to speak about that with a higher degree of authority than if you were an external candidate. So again, this cover letter best practices, I won't go over too much of it, but it has some kind of key things. You can see the first one is there is no such thing as a stock cover letter or a template. The fifth one I think is really important is avoid referring to the company as a stepping stone for your professional career. If you are applying for the first job outside of college, then ensure that the language of your cover letter reflects that you want to grow as a professional within this organization. Hiring managers and committees will want to know that you're committed, even if that's not necessarily true. Even if you're like, yeah, I just want to be there for a couple of years and I'm going to apply for a better job. Don't say that in your cover letter. Tell them, yeah, I see this as being kind of a long-term place where I feel like it's not lying, but it's being tactful. You're not saying something that they're going to look at and go, oh, well, that person's not committed, or they don't really want to be here. They want to be at Apple or Google. The other thing that I'll quickly point out is number 7, avoid repeating the content of your resume. This is something that's very, very important, and it's kind of advice that you'll hear from a lot of people. You don't just want to list experiences that you've had or list skills that you've had. You want to tell a story about yourself as a professional, and you want to offer compelling anecdotal evidence of your skills. Saying, I have great communication skills is one thing. Being able to put that into a story that demonstrates your communication skills is completely different and far more persuasive, as I'll talk about here in a second. So next, again, I won't read the rest of this, but do look through the remainder of this document, as there are multiple kind of key practices that are good for you to be aware of. Next, I want to talk about the one of the PowerPoint presentations. So if you go into writing effective cover letters, this presentation kind of gives you an overview of cover letters. So if you've never written one before, this will effectively complement what is in our textbook. I want to skip slightly ahead to talking about the structure and formatting of a cover letter. So formal cover letters, like a cover letter, are typically comprised of 4 sections: a header section, the introduction, body paragraphs, and then a closing. So you can see here, here's a pretty good example of one. You can see in the top, you have the header, so sender's address, followed by the date, followed by the employer's address, followed by the salutation. A couple key things about this is do the legwork to find the name of the person and the address. This won't always be available, but if you put in the extra effort to call them and actually call them for this assignment, call the company and ask, yeah, I'm applying for this position. Can you tell me to who I should address my cover letter? If that information is available, if they are able to release it, they will. And often I've had so many students tell me, yeah, it just took a phone call. It wasn't available online, but when I called, they gave it to me. That's not always true. I've noticed a lot of big companies like SpaceX, if you call them, they're they get so many applications and there's so many people who are actually reading these that they can't tell you. But it's still worth calling just to be on the safe side. Next is the introduction section. So you can see usually it's a paragraph. This is relatively straightforward. You introduce yourself, you state the position or title for which you're applying, you show some limited knowledge of the company, and then you set up the body paragraphs with a direct summary of your qualifications. The last sentence or two should begin setting up what you're going to talk about in the rest of the cover letter. Next is the body section, which provides concrete evidence supporting the qualification statement in the opening paragraph and demonstrates alignment between your qualifications and the job description or ad. One thing that is sort of controversial about cover letters among people who study them is whether or not the body paragraph should be a single paragraph or multiple paragraphs. I'll talk about that in a second. I have a pretty strong opinion about it, but there are instances where it makes more sense to do one or the other. Finally, the closing section concludes the letter by reiterating your objective and purpose, using different language than you used in your introduction, stating your enthusiasm for the position, tying together your claims from the body paragraphs into a strong, persuasive statement of purpose, and then providing relevant contact information and subtly indicating interest in an interview. It ends with sincerely and then your name and signature. And it's actually it's a nice touch to print a version of your cover letter and sign it, or do a digital signature and then scan it. That way you have your signature. You know, it's a small touch that I think goes a long way. So in the remainder of this presentation, which I won't go over in specific detail, I give examples from a single cover letter for each of these different sections. And that will kind of walk you through what they should look like, how they should feel, and that kind of thing. Next, I want to transfer over to a resource on the Purdue OWL that talks a little bit more about body sections of cover letters. So the big thing with the body section is you want to illustrate these qualifications that you have. You don't just want to list the qualifications, as I said earlier, but you want to provide an example that shows them that you have those skills. So some ideas for what might set you apart from others. They say special projects. Explain coursework that gives you a type of professional experience. Awards. Show that others have recognized the high quality of your work. Include only those awards that relate to the position you desire. Accomplishments. Demonstrate how you improved efficiency or productivity at work or school. Include what you did at school that proves your skills. Explain how you set a goal and reached it. It's very narrative. So for instance, as an intern at Boeing, I was in charge of a group of fellow interns. One of my primary responsibilities was to blah, blah, blah. One time we were under pressure to finish a project, blah, blah, blah. This proves that in the position that I'm applying for, I will be able to act as a leader. It's that structure of stating, at this position, I did this. Here's a very specific example of me doing that, and then here's how it relates to the position for which I'm applying. Here's another example from the OWL. While at Purdue University, I participated in a collaborative web consulting project for a technical writing class. With two peers, I served as a web consultant for a local business, Patter's Painters. In order to make feasible recommendations for revisions, additions, and deletions to Patter's Painters' website, we conducted interviews, observed the workplace, and completed web analyses. I believe these experiences match the requirements you outline in the job description. This is an okay example, but it illustrates all of the moves. Stating the job, describing the experience, going into great detail about what you actually did, and then making the connection to the job for which you are applying. I think this last sentence could be a lot stronger and more specific. This is rather generic and isn't tailored to the position itself. But again, this gives you a good idea of what that paragraph might look like. Now, as I said, there is some controversy about how to structure the body section. Whether to do it in one paragraph or 2 paragraphs, or even sometimes 3 paragraphs. There's some disagreement about this. My opinion is that a single paragraph cover letter tends to feel way too crammed and disorganized. Whenever I see someone doing a single page cover letter or single body paragraph cover letter, it's as though they're throwing everything into that one paragraph. It makes it harder to read, it buries important information deep within a long paragraph, and it just feels like a wall of text that most people are going to skim. Recruiters skim cover letters. They do. And rather than seeing that as a bad thing, like, oh, we don't want them to skim, we want to help them skim. We want to make their skimming more effective and more efficient. One way of doing that, in my opinion, is to break that single paragraph into 2 paragraphs. One on each experience or skill. So your first paragraph is all about the skills that you gained at an internship. The second paragraph is all about the skills that you gained while working on a project in a class at Purdue. Each paragraph begins with a strong topic sentence that explains what the paragraph includes and ends with a direct connection to the position to which you are applying. In my opinion, that makes it much easier to show your qualifications, and it clearly gives the paragraph, or the entire letter, a strong structure. As I said, you can do 3 body paragraphs, but these are much harder, and really, I think, are best suited for a qualifications-based cover letter. When you're showing skills, you're showing experiences, and then you want a paragraph that directly explains how and why you are qualified for the position. Whichever method you use, it's important that you set up the structure in your introduction so that the audience knows to expect it. In your introduction paragraph, the last sentence or 2 should say something along the lines of, I believe that I'm qualified for this position due to the experience that I gained as an intern, as well as the skills that I gained working on a project in my electrical engineering class at Purdue. That sets up to the reader, okay, they're going to talk about 2 main experiences, 1 in each paragraph. I've added a few examples of each kind of cover letter to give you a sense of how they can be developed. The first one is a great example of experience-based cover letters, as it has 2 body paragraphs focused around 2 experiences with multiple examples of the skills gained in each experience. So in this one, the writer talks about being an intern at Ag Genetics, talk about what they did, talk about their responsibilities, talk about a particular example of when they performed those skills, and then connects it back to the particular position to which they're applying. And you can see the second body paragraph talks about being a member at a major cooperative house, and it's again a single contained paragraph. Same thing with cover letter number 2. First paragraph is about Liberty Mutual Insurance and goes into great detail about what they did there. The second is talking about undergraduate research experience. Again, 2 very focused paragraphs. Cover letter 4 is a good example of a skills-based cover letter. You can see this first paragraph, they talk about multiple experiences, and they talk about first research experience in different positions, and then second leadership in different positions. And this is also clearly set up in the first paragraph. I have growing knowledge of dosage forms and experience with statistical analysis methods to equally valuable pieces of the pharmaceutical quality control puzzle. Talk about their leadership experience and set up what they're going to talk about in that body section. The third is a good example of a qualifications-based cover letter. They're talking about, they have 3 major body paragraphs. They're applying for a job at Eastman Chemical, and what they want to show is that they've worked at similar companies doing similar kinds of work. And across 3 paragraphs, they begin by talking about Kodiak firm. Then they move to talking about a second internship at a different company. And then third, talking about a third experience that is slightly different from the other two. Each of these adds up in total to what they're trying to communicate about applying to Eastman Chemical. Again, you can see the structure here is a 3-paragraph structure, so the introduction and the conclusion are a little bit smaller, and there's 3 separate cohesive body paragraphs. Returning to the PowerPoint presentation really quickly, I want to go over a couple conventions of cover letters. So if you skip ahead to pages 18 and 19, talking about document design, some best practices. First, you want font no smaller than 11 point. If it gets really down to like 10 or even 9, it just gets too small for most people to read. Use block format. Text should be justified to the left without indentations. Generally, it's suggested that you avoid using a preformed template and instead develop your own. Some visual design best practices are to have between 0.7 and 1 inch margins, to use single spacing, to make sure that there's white space that is equal on all margins, that you are using a clear and professional font, and that you are not overcrowding the page. Generally speaking, it's better to have more white space and then to leave off some of your content than the opposite. Finally, I want to end by discussing some common mistakes that I frequently see in cover letters. First is not having enough detail, being too vague. The examples that you provide just don't really say much. They could be about any position. They could be written by any student. Next is to offer too much detail, to be too technical. Don't always assume that the people who are reading your cover letter are going to be those with whom you're going to be working with, such as a supervisor. It might be someone in HR. It might be somebody who is brought on from another part of the company to read cover letters but doesn't have the same technical expertise as you. Even if you're applying to a company that is, top of the line in what you do, don't assume that everyone who reads your cover letter will have that same level of knowledge. Paragraphs that are too short or too long, there is no kind of standard length, but a paragraph that is a sentence or 2 sentences needs more detail, and a paragraph that takes up between a third and a half of the page is way too long and needs to either be carefully revised or simply split in half. Body paragraphs that do not connect to qualifications for the position. So paragraphs where you're talking about a good experience, but it's unclear why it's important to the reader, how it has anything to do with the position to which you are applying. You need to make the argument for why a position or a skill set should be relevant to the reader. Don't assume that they're going to automatically see that. Introductions and conclusion that do not communicate to each other or do not set up the structure of the paragraph. I see this all the time, where in introduction, you list out all these skills that you want to talk about, and then you talk about completely different skills in the body section. Make sure that when you're writing your introduction, that you're setting up what you actually talk about. Similarly, the conclusion needs to return to that statement of purpose that you set up in your introduction and make a strong, persuasive finish showing that the skills and experiences you've had directly prepare you for the position to which you're applying. The heading and closing are incorrectly formatted or unprofessional. This is something that it just takes time and practice. Look at the examples that I've provided, as they typically will give you a good sense of what to do. A cover letter that is not tailored, that simply could be written for any job by any student at any time. Make sure that they see that you are writing this specifically for them. And finally, a cover letter that is formatted incorrectly, that has far too short margins or far too large margins, that is in double spaced, that doesn't have enough white space, that uses font that is way too small. All these things, again, are conventions that the reader expects to see. That's it for now. Good luck as you finish up your cover letter and finish Unit 1.